2020. I am Councillor Dawn Kiddy, Deputy Chairperson of the Policy Committee, and I'll be chairing this meeting today. Lucky you guys for the second time. Hi Steve. This meeting will be in two parts. The general business this morning and the hearing of submissions on the draft coastal structures policy this afternoon starting at 2 p.m. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, could you please remember to speak clearly into your microphones and only one speaker at a time for clarity. Please make sure that your phones are turned to silent. And for the public's information, please be aware that the Council is minimising its use of paper and councillors will be using their laptops and other devices during the meeting to access the agenda and other meeting information. I would now call for any apologies. There is an apology from Dr. Wayne Beebley and a lateness from the Mayor.
And I need to have a apology just for leaving at 1 o'clock to go to a dentist appointment, please.
Yes, thank you. I had that recorded too. Thank you, Larry. I move that these apologies be accepted, and do I have a seconder? Councillor Clout, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against, no. Any abstentions? I declare the motion carried. There is no public forum at today's meeting. Are there any late items? No, there are none. There is no confidential business on this agenda, and there is no change to the order of business. Councillors, are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Great, on to business team. Report 7.1, Report 2020, Appointment of Trustees to the Tauranga Art Gallery Trust. We will have a report from Anne Blakeway, Manager of CCO Relationships and Governance. Hi Anne. Great. Could you please highlight any points you wish to?
Thank you. Through the Chair, I'll just take the report as read, so it's just approving the process to appoint 2 new trustees to the Art Gallery and to approve the appointment panel and the skills and experience sought. So that is pretty self-explanatory unless anyone has any questions.
Councillors, do we have any questions? All good. Can I please have a mover and a seconder for this recommendation? Do I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Arbery. And do I have a seconder? Okay, thank you, Councillor Clout. Councillor Arbery, would you like to speak to the motion?
Sure. Personally, I was impressed with the experience of the directors of the trust or the trustees and think that it's very good appointments.
Splendid, thank you, Councillor Arbery. Are there any other speakers? No other speakers? No right of reply, Councillor Arbery? I would now put to the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those against? Oh, thank you. Those against? Any abstentions? Splendid. I declare this motion carried. Now move on to 7.2, Report Amendment and Appointment of Directors to Council Organisations Policy. And we would like to hear from the gorgeous Anne again, please.
Thank you. So, as has been shown by the previous paper, The appointments process was reviewed in 2018 and some changes made, but it's made it actually quite onerous to work with. The fact that the skills and experience and the appointment panel have to come to council for approval. So we're suggesting a couple of amendments to the appointments policy. And one is that we delegate to the chief executive the authority to approve the skills, knowledge and experience sought, and along with the appointment panel composition, subject to consulting with the mayor. And the second is that if we have an obvious candidate for the chair position of a CCO within the current board who's already been approved by council as a trustee or director, then we would be able to appoint them without appointing an appointment panel. So these two small changes will make it much more practicable. So we're just asking for approval of those. Thank you.
Councillors, do we have any questions for Anne? Councillor Clout and then Councillor Robson.
Thank you, Anne. When you say if there's an obvious person that could be appointed, I mean, in whose eyes is that person obvious? If in that case, is it just the CE and the mayor, or do councillors have a say as well?
So the actual appointment would come to council for approval. It's just the approval of an appointment panel and all the steps before it that wouldn't come to council for approval. So because the chair is a current trustee or would possibly be a current trustee or director, they've already been approved on their skills and experience. So what happens in practicality is that a recommendation comes from the current board for that chair. They usually support that chair. The CE and mayor would then support it, but it would come to council for approval. We just wouldn't have an appointment panel. So it's cutting out that step, really.
Thank you, Anne. Councillor Robson, followed by Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, and could I get a little bit more on the practicality issue? I have some reservations about delegating too many, what I believe are governance responsibilities to the person responsible for the, if you like, the management of the organisation. So could you give us a little bit more on what the real impact of councillors being involved in setting the, or outlining the skills and requirements they believe applies to the job versus the giving that role to the chief executive?
So in practical terms, it just means coming back to council with report after report after report. You still would get a say in the appointments, but it's about delegating to the mayor and the chief executive the actual skills sought in conjunction with the board.
I understand what the proposal is, the recommendation in this report.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm asking is, what's the real impost of staying with the current process where the councillors are involved in effectively specifying the requirements of the job? And I'm asking for, some sort of evidence or examples of where that imposes a significant impost, because for me, delegating the responsibility for that to the chief executive is something I'm not that comfortable with.
A current example is with Tourism Bay of Plenty. They had their chair and deputy chair resign in July. We then had a council election. We had to put off the appointment process because of the hiatus period. We then had to come to council for approval of the skills and experience. And only now in March, and then we had White Island eruption, which delayed the interview process. But we've got a paper coming now on the 10th of March for the approval of two appointments to Tourism Bay of Plenty. So the Tourism Bay of Plenty board have been managing with 4 trustees since August, and they only have a quorum of 4, so that's proving quite difficult. So if we can try and make the process a little bit faster and get the boards with the full appointment of trustees, then that makes it easier for them to function.
So your example is, in an election year, if there's a significant civil defence emergency, this causes us a problem. I'm just taking that on board, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robson. We'll have Councillor Baldock, followed by Councillor Hollis.
Thanks, Anne. I think whilst it only says subject to consulting with the mayor, that there would be and understanding that there would be a bit of consultation wider than that if we were talking about appointing a chair from an existing group of councillors. But the ultimate decision would still, as was asked earlier, would come to a formal council meeting. And this is where perhaps the former CCO working group played a role, whereby it could also give input into that decision if it's re-established, because they have a lot more, once they've been going through all of this process for year after year, they have a lot more knowledge of how that board is working, I think, and can give
Excuse me, just
some guidance.
point of
there.
order. Is there a question in that?
Can we please ask the question, Councillor Baldock?
So do you think that the consultation would occur with more than just the mayor in an informal way, and potentially with something like the CCO working group, should it be re-established shortly?
That's a question for probably the CE to answer about the CCO working group. Or
Through the chair. Look, generally, we make, I would say, half a dozen of these appointments a year, on average, because of the rotation of the various board members of the CCOs. And to me, it just seems like a bureaucratic nonsense, the fact that we have to come to council to essentially define a process or the skills required on a particular board, when generally they're reasonably standard. It just seems a step unnecessary. I'm trying to fast track and alleviate bureaucracy.
Thank you, Marty. Have you finished, Councillor Baldock? Can we please have Councillor Hollis?
One of the things that we're trying to repair is trust with the community. Is there any risk of perceived fox and henhouse kind of thinking from the community when that level of bureaucracy is removed? When bureaucracy is removed and a level of perhaps control is lost, is there a risk that the community doesn't trust the council or the staff to employ the people who are going to employ our directors? Is there a risk of the perception of that?
I think the appointment process is still a thorough process. The boards of the CCOs are included in the process. The advertisements go out publicly, and the appointments have to come to council. So I still think there's some rigour with the appointment process. I don't believe that there would be a risk of that.
And just further to that, noting that the mayor and the CEO would also be involved in that process of setting the criteria for who we're looking for, and then ultimately, again, it comes back to you guys for the decision.
Happy to move, Madam Chair, when questions are finished.
I'll just ask if there are any other questions first. Thank you, Councillor Baldock. And I'd just like to know if Councillor Morris and Granger would like to say anything, if they're still online.
Happy to speak to the motion at the appropriate time, Madam Chair, but no further questions.
Fantastic. Can I please have a mover and a seconder for the recommendations?
Yes, I'll move.
So, Councillor Arbery and seconder, Councillor Baldock.
I think I indicated that I would move.
Sorry? What? Baldock, sorry. Councillor Baldock and seconder, Councillor Arbery. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Baldock?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's, as was explained by the Chief Executive, it's a simple process for him and the Mayor to have a delegation, particularly the Chief Executive, a delegation to sort out the skills required. It does help simplify things a lot. The second issue of the resolution about choosing an existing board member to become the chair, it does make sense that that is simplified, and it's not necessary to always go out and seek, the whole process for appointment. However, it does need to be managed carefully, because should it be a case where a resolution comes before council to appoint someone and council has decided to turn that down, it would be quite a damaging situation within that board. So there needs to be a lot of consultation occurring to make sure that there's general support for that before it gets to an actual formal resolution, I think. So I'm happy to support it though.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Could I hear from Councillor Morris now, please? Oh, sorry. Sorry, Councillor Arbery first.
I do concur with Councillor Baldock's comments, particularly around his guidance of making sure that any appointment to chairship in particular is widely canvassed with members. In these sorts of situations where we're delegating from the democracy to the bureaucracy in some senses, there is of course a heightened risk should there be an issue with that process later on. But that, of course, is something that the Chief Executive is clearly happy to accept. But obviously, if things went wrong, then there's a process to go through to rectify that with the incumbent Chief Executive. So I'm comfortable to accept it as is, happy with the skills that we've got in terms of our staff, but it does raise some issues when there are difficulties.
We please have Councillor Arbery now.
Seems to me that we're making a mountain out of a molehill. I think the primary stakeholders in this is the CCO and the existing board. So if they're involved in the process, if we have input through the Mayor and the CE, I don't think we need to have too much extra bureaucracy in this process.
Thank you, Councillor Arbery. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Robson?
Yeah, I think Councillor Morris inadvertently summed up the issue. It's actually transferring something from the democratic governance end to the bureaucratic management end. That was the phrasing he used. We were transferring from democracy to bureaucracy. So I think we need to be clear about what we're doing here. I think the idea that there is a risk to an appointment being challenged, in fact, sort of underestimates the effect of momentum and the desire to avoid perceptions of conflict, i.e. once a recommendation is made, it's very rare for it to be challenged, even though on occasion it should be, because it takes courage to challenge a decision that's effectively come with the nod of the Chief Executive and perhaps the Mayor alone. If Councillor Baldock is correct that what we are documenting in the policy is not in fact the likely process and consultation would be much wider than the Mayor, then let's document in the policy what in fact the practice will be. It is very, very bad for any bureaucracy to document a policy that doesn't reflect the intended behaviour of the organisation. It leaves the organisation open to challenge at a number of levels. I appreciate the issue that's being raised, but I don't think the policy amendments or changes as drafted fulfil that. I would like to see this given more thought. I come back to, I think the fact that these are CCOs, I note the words of Councillor Arbery in terms of who the primary stakeholders are. The primary stakeholders are actually the citizens of the city via the council. Although we know it's a joke that the second C in council-controlled organisations is absent, we don't have to participate in removing that voluntarily. They should be controlled by council. They are our responsibility. So I would like to see this given, if nothing else, more thought. And I'm very much against, as I say, documenting in a policy something that isn't effectively what we would do in practice. So I shall be voting against the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Robson. Are there any other speakers? Your right of reply, Councillor Baldock, please.
Just briefly, I think the assumption that somehow we would be forced into, or not forced, but to capitulate our responsibility into, accepting a motion and a recommendation for someone without challenging the Chief Executive or the Mayor's recommendation is not borne out by the facts of history. This council has frequently, I think, gone against those recommendations and, whether rightly or wrongly, made their decisions in the interests of what we think we are here for to do. So I don't see that as being a problem, so long as we are given enough information beforehand to have knowledge of the decision, pending decision, before it comes to council, so that people can express their views. The councillors may decide, no, I think in this situation we need to go to the public and have a full process. That would be the decision you would make. Or else you go with what is being suggested as a recommendation to appoint an existing board member to the position of chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. I will now put this to the motion. Can we hear Councillor Morris and Granger? Are you still online?
No, now that you've put the motion, and so my ability to make points of order has expired, but no, you're doing a fantastic job.
Okay. All those in favour say aye. Aye. So I have Mayor Powell, I have Councillor Arbery, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Baldock, Councillor Salisbury, Councillor Clout. All those, aye. That's Councillor Morris, was that?
Correct, yes, that's an aye.
And Councillor Granger, do we hear from you? That's an aye as well. Thank you. And those against? Councillor Robson and Councillor Hollis. Any abstentions? I now declare the motion carried. We'll now move on to 7.3, the report of approval of elected members' expenses and resources policy 2020. We will have Emma Joyce, policy analyst, to come and speak to us, please, and highlight any points.
Kia ora, good morning, councillors. So this is the approval of the elected members' expenses report. The committee made some decisions back in November, which have informed the draft policy today. There's just one point that needs a further decision. So in November, the committee decided that councillors sitting on hearings would not be able to claim an allowance for that. Further advice from the Remuneration Authority is that we can't include that in the policy. There has to be a entitlement included in the policy of any amount up to $80 or $100 for the chair. That's the maximum. You can set a lower limit of, say, $1 if that was the decision of the committee. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have any questions? Councillor Arbery?
I'm happy to move a motion after questions.
Do I have a seconder for that? Oh. Yes, thank you, Councillor Morris.
Through the chair, I could answer that if you may. It's $17.70.
$17.70. Councillor Morris?
Excuse me, Madam Chair, it is increasing to $18.90 from the 1st of April, I believe, this year.
Was there a point to your question, Councillor Morris? And Councillor Clout.
Thank you. Emma, can you explain what the likelihood is of councillors actually sitting on hearings in the next 2.5 years? I know we have a city plan change coming up, but is a councillor necessarily going to be sitting on that hearings panel?
Through the chair, could I just direct that question to Christine? She may have a better position to answer that.
So there will be a number of plan changes. We are bringing a separate report to council to make a decision on who would be on those hearings panels. Would certainly be recommending that there would be some external experts, given the nature of that. And it's totally an elected member call as to whether there are elected members on that hearings panel and the number of that. So that's still a decision for you to make. So it's possible, and there are other hearings other than city plan hearings as well that sometimes do occur. So the dog ones, there are sort of more of a regulatory nature, but they tend to be shorter in duration. The ones that take significant preparation time and hearings and deliberations times would normally be those associated with the city plan.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Baldock.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. Christine, approximately when would be the time frame if we did decide that elected members were going to be on there? When would you start hearings with what we have on schedule so far?
So we're looking at notification at this current time, the third quarter of 2020. So it would be not in this calendar year. It would be 2021 would be the sort of timing of that. By the time you've got your submissions, we've analysed submissions, and you have hearings.
And it's the first time I've heard dog hearings being lumped together with this. Is that the case, that this would be a payment for those sitting on dog hearings? Because that would seem a little bit different. May be the case, but
through you, Madam Chair, no, it's not. It's only for RMA hearings.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Arbery, did you want to move something?
I'd like to move that the reimbursement rate be the minimum wage.
Do I have a seconder for that? So, sorry, thank you. Councillor Clout was first in there, Steve.
We just checked that in terms of Resolution A, there's a distinction between a member and a chair. Are you proposing for both, just so we're clear for the resolution?
Yes, for both.
And Councillor Clout, you were seconding for both. Thank you. Councillor Arbery, would you like to speak to the motion?
Sure. So councillors are well remunerated for their time. I think sitting on hearings, panels, that should be something that should be a passion, something you're excited about, not something that you do to get paid $80 an hour.
Thank you, Councillor Arbery. Could I please hear from Councillor Clout?
Yeah, thank you. Totally support Councillor Arbery. Clearly, councillors, are paid effectively a full-time job, and so it's hard to imagine any councillor who's on a hearing committee doing, extensively beyond a full-time job anyway, because I think they would obviously have to drop some other council meetings if it was a huge time impost on them. So I think giving them the minimum wage, I think, is a very fair, and I think it gives a good signal to those out there who are the ratepayers.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Now, Councillor Robson.
I'd like to move an amendment, please. The amendment being that the amount be the living wage, and it's just a principal position rather than anything else. If I have a seconder, obviously I can speak to it.
Is there a seconder for Councillor Robson? For his amendment. So, Councillor Hollis will move the amendment.
Speaking to the amendment, yeah, I think the living wage, minimum wage issue is one that's real, and we should recognise in the motions that we passed. I would make the point that, certainly speaking personally, and I would hope it would represent the view of all my colleagues on a good day, is that I don't believe any councillor would claim this. I certainly wouldn't. But the use of minimum wage in this type of discussion, I think, is so last century, and I think we need to recognise that there is a concept of a living wage, and we should refer to it as often as possible to socialise ourselves and the wider community.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers to that amendment, Councillor Hollis?
Do we have to accept the funds given to us at all? Is there a mechanism to then donate those funds back into the pot some way? Can we accept it and immediately return it?
Through the chair, you don't have to claim the allowance if you don't want it, so it would just stay in the pot.
Is there any further discussion? Councillor Clout.
Thank you. I'll vote against the amendment because, as we've said before, this is a payment on, or potential payment on top of a full-time salary, effectively. So the living wage is higher than the minimum wage. So I think at this point, sticking with the minimum wage sends the right signal, and I think is appropriate.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Right, we will now vote on the amendment by Councillor Robson. Do I have all those in favour say aye? That's Arbery, Hughes, Baldock, Hollis and Robson and Salisbury. Thank you. Morris and Granger, are you still online? Okay. All those against? Councillor Clout, Councillor Granger, and Councillor Morris. I voted aye. So. Over to Robin.
The amendment will be that prove councillors who participate in hearings be entitled to claim an allowance at the rate of the current living wage per hour, and the same per hour for chair of the panel. So the original motion was for the current minimum wage, and the amendment is to change that to the current living wage. Yes. For the duration of the meeting. Of the. Yeah.
Perhaps I can clarify the.
Thank you, Mayor Pell. I now declare the motion carried. Amendment carried. Thank you. Brilliant. Now.
Put the substantive motion. So the amendment's approved, so now we put the substantive motion.
Okay, team, the amendment is approved, so now put the substantive motion.
Correct.
Yes. Yes. Okay, thank you, Councillor Baldock.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to read the definition in this report of what council business is, in other words, our responsibilities, is quite informative. Means formal council committee meetings, workshops, seminars, statutory hearings, training courses, conferences, site visits, meetings with staff, meetings with community groups, meetings with members of the public, and social activities where a member attends as a council representative. So that is what our roles are. And in the next item, we'll be discussing leave of absence, and I think there's also a definition in here about leave of absence. So when we're not able to perform those duties, we seek that leave of absence. But clearly that definition of what our roles are includes statutory hearings. The difficulty is, I think, and I'm voting for the motion, but the difficulty is that sitting on RMA hearings is an enormous amount of work. It does require lots of preparation for those meetings. It's a very, very important role when we get to amending the city plan, and I'm not sure that we are having a good view of all of that, given that we need to first of all have RMA Commissioner certification to sit on those. We need to represent the public in those hearings because it's not just a resource consent issue, it's something that's much broader that affects the community. Whether people take the allowance or not, as Councillor Robson has said, it's entirely up to them. But some may feel that the extra hours they're putting in, which is much more, may warrant it, but that'll be a decision for individual members to make. So I support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Any other speakers? Up on the screen, we can see the substantive motion. We know that it was moved by Councillor Arbery and seconded by Councillor Clout. I would now put this to motion. Oh, Councillor Robson? Yep, I'll now put to the motion A. Okay, which reads, approve councillors who participate in hearings being entitled to claim an allowance at the rate of the current living wage per hour for being a member of a hearings panel and for the current living wage per hour for the chair of the panel. Those in favour say aye. That is Councillor Clout, Councillor Salisbury, Councillor Robson, Hollis, Hughes, Baldock, Arbery and Powell and Morris. Councillor Granger, are you still online? Yeah. Against? Oh, he's agreed. Great. Woo, I declare a... Oh, I see. Any abstentions? Right. I call A motion carried. We are now looking at motion B, which adopts the elected members' expenses and resources policy 2020 to replace the elected members' expenses and resources policy 2016. All those in favour, aye. Aye. All those against? Any abstentions? Councillor Robson. I declare the motion carried. We will now move on to 7.4, report for standing orders. We will now hear from Coral here, the Manager of Democracy Services. Coral will highlight any points that she needs to. Welcome, Coral.
Kia ora. I have a couple of changes to the, or corrections to the standing orders, which I'll take you through carefully. I have just a few quick comments about our standing orders training that I thought I would just highlight just for the purposes of some of the people who weren't here. Oh, sorry. I've got a couple of corrections to my report which I'll take you through. I just thought I'd just go over some of the highlights of the training session very quickly. One of the points raised was for staff members to be more shorter rather than longer with their presentations of their reports. I'd just like to say that I thought the training session that we had with Steve McDowell and Vern Walsh was very productive. We did sort of talk a lot about what worked well in meetings and what caused you frustrations, and what we can do in terms of some of the protocols to ensure more efficient and effective meetings, whilst keeping the debate and that public discourse and openness and transparency alive and well. We talked a lot about meeting protocols, about questions of clarification, and I think you've seen a point of order already today by Councillor Hollis around the idea of asking a question of clarification. So I think we had quite a good time about talking about that. And we went over the powers of the chairperson in some detail, and Steve and Vern talked about concepts such as collaborative disagreements and collective responsibility. So, for me, that was a very valuable training. They also proposed that maybe we could do a 5-minute review after each meeting, just with the elected members, to see how that meeting went, and to kind of pull out, some of the points, so that it doesn't fester. You kind of get out the issues that went well and what could improve. So in my report, I've set out the changes from the 2016 version. Now, some of those you have no choice about, and I've highlighted those. Those are just the amendments from the legislation. So, they are what they are. You can't change those. But there are some areas of discretion. So I'll take you through those a little bit in some more detail. And we did go over them at the training session. So the audio or audio-visual links, you cannot do that unless they're in your standing orders. The casting vote, now we talked in the training about the options for the casting vote. At the moment you do have it in a full casting vote in your standing orders. Just a reminder that you need 75% of the vote to change it. It's a higher standard than if your normal majority, which is just over 50%. So you can either have it in or not have it in, or you could have it for limited use, such as the adoption of an annual plan or a statutory document like that. We talked about the options for your motions and amendments, and you're with option B at the moment, and it's recommended that you continue with option B. But just we did discuss that you can, for a particular item or a particular meeting, you can change that. You could go to option C, which is much less formal, or you could, when you're talking about suspending standing orders, we talked about you couldn't suspend all of them, but you could suspend the ones about time speaking, and you could suspend the ones about speaking more than once. So so that's the potential to kind of free it up a little bit. Leave of absence, the Deputy Mayor has talked about the leave of absence, and there is a change to the definition. The Deputy Mayor did point out to me, which was well spotted, that in the expenses and allowance policies there is already a definition, and we did talk about adding a definition to the standing orders, so it would make sense for them to be the same. The leave of absence, that's on page 32, that definition in your agenda. In the expenses rules, and that says leave of absence is a period of time approved by the Mayor for which an elected member is on leave from the duties of being an elected member. And I thought that was quite a nice, concise definition. We talked about recording leave of absence in the minutes, and it's actually recorded as an apology, even though it's a leave of absence. And the Deputy Mayor is, we've been talking about this idea of distinguishing between a leave of absence and an apology. But actually, in the minutes, it's just recorded as an apology. But we did talk about wanting to record an apology when you were on council business. And so I've added that in, I put it into Standing Order 13.4, but it actually should be in 13.5, which is actually about recording apologies. So that's on page 71 of your agenda. So that is really just that the minutes will also record if the member is absent as a result of a commitment made on behalf of the council or at the request of the mayor for council-related business. And again, that's up to you to decide whether you want to make that distinction. The other changes were the delegation to the CE during the and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, but interregnum period, which means between the reigns. So that's rather than have to have a resolution each time, each triennium, it just goes in your standing orders. We talked about reducing the time limit on movers from 10 minutes to 5 minutes, and actually that's reflected in the appendices already. And we also talked about procedural motions, and to close debate, there's some change there about that. So I'm happy to take any questions. Otherwise, with those changes to the two standing order changes that I put, which is the leave of absence definition and just moving from 13.4 to 13.5, that idea about recording when you've got absent on council business. Those are two changes I'm proposing to the standing orders. And just again a reminder that you need 75%, which is 8.25, which is actually nine people. So it's quite a high threshold to make changes to your standing orders. Thank you.
Thank you, Coral. Do we have any questions, councillors? Councillor Baldock.
Thanks, Coral. Just on the what is page 71 of the agenda and is 13.4 in the draft we have with the apologies, it still says, for clarification, the acceptance of a member's apology constitutes a grant of leave of absence for that meeting. My preference would, and I would move this as an amendment, my preference would be that that's removed, because that's still confusing the difference between a leave of absence, which means you're not performing your full duties, and simply you just didn't make it to a meeting. Would you agree with that as an amendment?
I don't have any problems with that. I think it was there for clarification, but I don't have a problem with removing it. Yeah.
Councillor Baldock.
And secondly, it was something I emailed the members about this morning, just with the apologies, we would note in the minutes the apology if they're on council business. I'm still of the view, and it will obviously be tested by an amendment, but I'm still of the view that registering an apology for sickness simply is reasonable, given that the member is not absent, apart from that sickness. You have raised issues of privacy and so on. Maybe could you explain that a little bit further?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm not comfortable with that. I think it should just be an apology, recorded as an apology, and I don't think that it has to, the reason for it has to be recorded. I think it's a privacy issue, and the reason why we're delegating to the Mayor in the first place the ability to approve leave of absence.
Yeah, but you're not getting leave of absence for being sick. Given that there is the practice of, at the end of a year, publishing how many meetings we were absent from, don't you think that it would be our decision as to whether we wanted sickness recorded separately than any other reason? Because I personally think someone who may, for whatever reason, have recurring flu or whatever else, I can't see it being privacy. I can't see me being worried about, someone knowing I had the flu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just through my personal opinion is I don't think it should be recorded. I think it's just an apology. That it's recorded in the minutes quite simply as an apology.
Thank you. Can I please have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation?
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, I believe Councillor Morris has an amendment that he would like to make to the standing orders about the principles. And I'm sorry, Councillor Morris, he did tell me this morning and I should have mentioned that.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
But also at the appropriate time, I'm happy to move an amendment. But may I ask my question at this time?
Councillor Morris.
Madam Chair. Hello?
Yes, Councillor Morris.
Thank you. My question, I guess it is through you and to you, Madam Chair. I did have the benefit of attending the briefing on standing orders, and my question is to you: are the elected members satisfied to listen to each other reading speeches, or is there an appetite to rule out the reading of speeches in the chamber? What's your thoughts on that, having attended the briefing?
Thank you, Councillor Morris. I feel that the general, if I could hear you correctly, was do we want councillors to read speeches? From my understanding was that we are allowed to have a speech in front of us. We can read it off our notes. We are trying to keep it briefer, which is why we've taken it down from 10 minutes to 5 minutes. And that was my understanding, but open to anything else if anyone needed to add to that. Is that what you were asking, Councillor Morris?
Yes, that is correct, Madam Chair. I was just asking whether there was any discussion on it and whether there was any appetite to actually formally, for want of a better term, ban the reading of speeches verbatim in the chamber.
Councillor Morris, there was definitely a lot of discussion around this, and I'd be happy to give you a full briefing when you're back. Absolutely no problem at all, but we definitely discussed it at length.
Okay, to that end, I may be prepared to move a couple of amendments at the appropriate time, Madam Chair.
Splendid.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I did have one more question, if I may. It just came to me that I missed before. May I?
Certainly, Councillor Baldock.
Coral, just the issue around the reducing of the movers' length of time to speak just pains me greatly. But we did discuss in that time that with major issues, we may have had the chair would obviously probably do it, but I just think we should record that in the minutes at least today. But how would you see that happening during a meeting? You've got some major thing that people need to really get into it. And for the benefit of the public, really, hear the reasons behind why we vote the way we do.
I think you've got two options. So for any item, you can either opt for option C rather than option B, or you can suspend standing orders 21.2, which is time limit on speakers, and the chair always has the discretion in any meeting really to do that, but you can, and then there's also standing order 21.5, which the members may speak only once, and you can suspend those two, and with those two, really, that's the crux of the matter about people speaking more than once, speaking longer, and I think the flexibility is there, and I think we discussed that in some detail at the standing orders training. Rather than suspending standing orders altogether, just target those two and you'll have quite a liberal meeting.
Very helpful, thank you.
Thank you. Were there any other questions for Coral, councillors? Fantastic. Thank you, Coral. I will now please ask for a mover and a seconder for the recommendations.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm happy to move, but I would like to make a suggestion, if I may. Because there are a few amendments that may be put into it, it would be better, I think, if we could have a short recess and get Robin, to actually get everything up there that is in the amendments so that we can then go through it with some consistency or some process rather than have amendments popping up as we go through these. This is a big sort of thing of standing orders. If that would be agreeable to you, Madam Chair, then I would give all mine, so maybe a 10-minute thing would be enough to just sort it. If Steve has an amendment, that could come in and be up on the screen as well. Is that possible?
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. It is now 10:01. If we could please adjourn and be back here at 10:15. Thank you. Team, I would like you to look at the screen, please. Draw your attention to the standing orders recommendation with the amendments on them. We're going to vote separately on each amendment, and for it to be a success, we're going to need 75% acceptance and support of each motion. So, Councillor Baldock, you did say that you would like to move the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd move the motion with all of those amendments, recognising that the ones that are changed from our order paper would be then voted on individually so that people can get through that process, and we knock out ones that may not have 75% and then finally at the end. So
Yeah, no, they are all
happy
being
to move
voted
that.
on separately. Thank
Yep.
you, Councillor Baldock.
Thank
And do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Arbery, thank you. Councillor Baldock, would you like the right to speak first?
Well, actually, I won't speak to it. I think we've had a lot of discussion on it. It should be pretty explanatory. And I'm happy to just see how the votes go on it, really.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Councillor Arbery. Are there anyone else would like to speak? Councillor Clout.
Thank you. I'm just keen to find out who the person was that has requested that we amend Principle 1.1 to include free speech. Just a bit of background as to who did that and why. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clout. That was Councillor Morris, and I dare say he's going to have his say very, very soon. In fact, now, Councillor Morris, would you like to speak?
Indeed, Madam Chair. Look, I just wonder whether you'd do me the indulgence of reading out the amendments that have gone up on the screen.
The first amendment? Okay, B.1, Amendment Principle 1.1 to include free speech. Members will respect the diversity of thought and opinion that are part of a healthy democracy. Councillor Morris, did you hear?
Is it just my one?
Just 1 second, Councillor Morris, please.
Councillor Morris, I can read you through the amendments. So your Principle 1 has been amended. The next amendment is to the definition of leave of absence. A new definition of leave of absence to read, leave of absence is a period of time approved by the Mayor for which an elected member is on leave from the duties of being an elected member. The next amendment suggested will be Amendment 6 as we're going through, is to amend Standing Order 13.4 by deleting, for clarification, the acceptance of a member's apology constitutes a grant of leave of absence for that meeting. The next amendment after that, which will be point 7, amend Standing Order 13.5 to include the minutes will record if a member is absent from the meeting on council business. And secondly, the minutes will record if the member is absent due to sickness and other relevant reasons beyond the member's control. And those are the amendments to what you have in front of you. I'll see if I can email them through to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Committee Secretary. Madam Chair, I'm happy to speak now, should you deem it appropriate.
Fantastic. Take it away, Steve.
Okay, so in terms of the amendment which I was proposing, but happily Councillor Baldock has moved, I think that it's important to emphasise the role of free speech in our democracy. I mean, it's a bit of mum and apple pie stuff, but I think given the day and age in which we are in which people confuse hate speech with speech I hate and all that sort of thing, it's really important to reaffirm, in my view, the principles of democracy in a council document. Now, yes, it is mum and apple pie, but I think that we need to have it in black and white there. In terms of Amendment 7, I will not be supporting that because I think that it is in the public interest whether a member is an apology or not, leave of absence or not, that is certainly in the public interest. However, it is a matter of privacy whether a member has a sickness or not. That is a member. That is a matter for them. I'll give you an example. You know, if a member is suffering from cancer, for argument's sake, and they wish to have regular chemotherapy at a particular time, and that conflicts with some certain dates, that the recording of sickness would give rise to questions, which in my view are not appropriate and do impinge on the Bill of Rights Act and do impinge on the higher statutory responsibility we all have in terms of the Privacy Act, let alone our own standing orders. So I would oppose 7. It's not in the public interest for the public to know whether an elected member is down with a particular illness, unless it's the coronavirus, and that's a separate matter. But it's just not information that needs to be shared. People need to know whether a member is there or not, and that may give rise to questions, but not the reason why in terms of sickness. I think that's impinging on the privacy of the individual.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. I'll now hear from Councillor Clout.
Thank you. It's sort of a question, but when we take these in parts, can we take 7.1 separate to 7.2? Because I agree with Councillor Morris on 7.2. I'll be voting against that, but I'll be voting for 7.1. Thank you.
Councillor Clout, we've got that under control. Don't you worry, up here at the front hot seat, it's all ready to go. Fantastic. Do I have any more questions from anybody? Any further discussion? Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Would you like your right of reply now?
I will. Just to address the issue around 7.2. Look, when a member requests an apology for a meeting, it's up to them to say a reason. If they don't want to say, you know, I'm sick and therefore have it recorded, it's up to them. But if a member does want it recorded, they are free to do so. I think the illustration that Councillor Morris gave about serious illness such as cancer and other things, we have had that example in the past where the late Councillor McIntosh was given leave of absence twice, once to have treatment, the second time was unfortunately prior to her passing. And that is dealt with by the leave of absence. You know, you know you're not going to be just missing one meeting. You take leave of absence from the mayor to hopefully recover from serious illness, and you may be absent for a month or two. So it's dealt with in that way. I think it's entirely up to each individual member as to whether they wish their absence to be noted as a sickness or not. And I believe it should be our prerogative to do so. We waive the right to privacy if we want to. It's not enforced on us. So I'd like members to consider that before they vote on that. Otherwise, that's all I wish to say. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. We're just making a couple of changes here, just so that everybody's aware. We will be reading the amendments out one by one, just so that Councillor Morris and Granger are on the same page as everybody here. And when you are voting, could you please raise your hands at the same time? Just going to make it a lot easier for our recording. So, first of all, I would now like to put motion A to vote, which says we are receiving the standing orders report. All those in favour say aye. That's everybody. Aye is Granger and Morris. Fantastic. Those against? Any abstentions? Fantastic. Tick that one off. We are next going to B.1. These are what the Council recommends, the adoption of standing orders in Appendix 1, which includes, number 1, Amendment Principle 1.1 to include free speech. Members will respect the diversity of thought and opinion that are part of a healthy democracy. All those in favour say aye and raise your hands, please. And Morris and Granger? Great, that's all in favour. That's no one against and no abstentions. Great. We next have B.2. Members for members and public deputations right to attend by audio or audio-visual link, standing orders 13.7 to 13.16. All those for? Aye. Unanimous. Fantastic. We can move straight on to B.3, casting vote provision for the mayor or chairperson or any other person presiding at a meeting. Standing orders 19.3. All those for? That's yes, thank you. And against? Councillor Robson. Baldock and Granger, did we hear from them? Morris, sorry. You're okay? Everyone's aye. And Morris, any abstentions? No. Great. Next we have B.4, option B, as the default provision for speaking and moving motions. Standing order 22.1. Those for, please raise your hands. That's unanimous. Have we got Granger there? Yep, fantastic. Moving right along, we've got B.5, delegating the mayor the power to grant a leave of absence for councillors in order to protect a member's privacy. Standing orders 13.3. And a new definition of the leave of absence to read. Leave of absence is a period of time approved by the mayor for which an elected member is on leave from the duties of being an elected member. Those in favour say aye. That's unanimous. Fantastic. We now have B.6. Amend the Standing Order 13.4 by delegating, for clarification, the acceptance of a member's apology constitutes a grant of leave of absence for that meeting. Oh, deleting, sorry. Yep, got it. Thank you. All those in favour? Great, unanimous again. Now we have B.7.1, Amendment Standing Order 13.5 to include the minutes will record if a member is absent from the meeting on council business. Those in favour say aye. That's unanimous again. Thank you. And number 2, the minutes will record if a member is absent due to sickness and other relevant reasons beyond the member's control. Those for say aye. That is Powell, Arbery, Hughes, Baldock. Can Morrison Granger, I couldn't hear you. Yes, aye. Okay, so that's Granger is aye. Those against? We have Salisbury, Morris, Clout, Robson, Hollis and Kitty.
The process we've been through is sort of quite limiting in some respects. I would be prepared to change my vote if the minutes were able to record at the member's request the reason for the member's absence.
Happy to amend that. That's what's intended anyway.
Because at the moment it's determinative. It just says it will. Whether you like it or not, we're going to tell the world why you're not here. And whereas if a member, I feel that way, of course, about voting on motions. I feel a member should have the right to, within limits, declare why they've taken the position they have, because it is possible to misinterpret things, and I think that's what we're looking for here. So if someone was prepared to...
Well, I'm certainly willing to adopt that as a change. I think it's a very good suggestion to make it clarify. So just put it in.
Madam Chair, if I may, it is a good suggestion, and this is to protect members from otherwise being recorded as being an absentia without there being good reason, when in fact, mostly, in my experience, there is good reason why they're absent. So happy to have that amended accordingly.
Just for clarification, I am going to read that again. That's 7B.2. The minutes will record if the member is absent due to sickness and other relevant reasons beyond the member's control at the member's request.
Can I just, the word will should become the word may, and then the minutes may record at the member's request.
Fantastic. And we're just changing the word will to may. Councillor Robson? That's fantastic. Great. All those in favour of the new amendment, please say aye. Unanimous. Fantastic. Anybody against? Great. Unanimous decision. Thank you very much. Great. Where are we up to? Okay, we are now up to B.8. Delegating to the Chief Executive during the election. Election period, the authority to make decisions on urgent matters that cannot wait until the first meeting of the new council. New Standing Order 6.6. All those in favour say aye. That's unanimous. Thank you. Next, the time limit on the movers of motions when speaking to the motion is reduced from 10 minutes to 5 minutes. Standing Order 21.2. Those in favour, and can we raise our hands on this one too? Nice and loud. Those in favour say aye. Wow. Councillor Baldock, did you have your hand raised? I can't hear you, Councillor Baldock. Could you? Please. Can we have that recorded? Thank you, Robin. I've lost where I am. I'm up here. Where am I now, Robin? Okay, great. And the last one, believe it or not, team. Adding that procedural motion to close or adjourn debate can be taken after two speakers have spoken for the motion and two against, or in the chairperson's opinion. It is reasonable to accept the closure motion. Standing Order 25.1. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? Councillor Robson and Councillor Morris. Have we heard from Granger? Great. That is fantastic. Thank you. We've got our 75%. That's fantastic. Yes. Yep, I would.
Which includes, no, that was included in
Yep.
the first.
Yeah, I did that in A. Yes. I did that in A, the first one. Great. Right, team, it's your lucky day. We will now adjourn the meeting and we are going to Oh, hold on 1 second. Thank you, councillors. We are just going to adjourn the meeting until 1 o'clock with the hearing of submitters on the draft coastal structures policy to start at 2 p.m. So if everybody could be back here at 1 o'clock, that would be fantastic. Thank you.